this one that we looked at initially, just looking at what are we looking at covering in each task. And this is kind of a ready reckoner for you to look at, when you start doing your assignment. So at least you clearly know what are the key areas that you're focusing on. So I'm just going to skip down to learning outcome 4. That is what we are looking at covering today. So I think in the case of, ignore this start and this thing, reason being, if we contextualize it. So basically in learning outcome 4, what we are looking at is trying to understand, the interpersonal and transferable skills that can be used, from a personal perspective within the organization. So here, what we are going to look at from a point of view of coverage of the indicated content is there are bits and pieces. If you look at a spec sheet, things like communication. Now we've done communication skills, which is 4.3, and there we have covered things like verbal communication, non-verbal communication, written communication, to a certain extent, essential listening skills, negotiation skills, and working effectively with others in terms of teamwork is something that we will maybe cover, at stage, because these are from a point of view of, just the content, maybe not covered in that particular chapter, which is communication skills. And then what we'll also look at this large chunk of something called time management. So how does staff actually manage, or basically look at time management skills when you're working as a manager, when you're working in positions wherein you're dealing with multitasking, you have various objectives to look at, and at some point in time, you are a supervisor or a manager, and wherein you have not just your own work responsibility, but responsibility for others' work in terms of to be able to deliver as a team. So time management is what I'm going to cover today, and I'm going to try and cover, something which is related to transferable skills. So this bit is what I'm looking at covering in the presentation that I will also email to you after the session. So they will directly correlate and cover your task 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 in learning outcome 4. Okay? Okay. So this is a ready reckoner for us. We're developing something which will be there for all the units. So, it is also a helpful guide for the learner to be able to, look at this presentation and at least know clearly what tasks have to be attempted in terms of an assignment brief. So this is a fairly long presentation. As you can see, 65 slides, but a lot of them are picturesque in the sense they have lots of images and other things in it. What we're going to try and do is basically cover some of the key bits in the session today, and then when I email it to you, you can go through it to understand a bit more. And if you have any questions, then we will take it up in the next session. Along with this, what I'm also going to do is basically send you a handout which will directly talk about work-based solutions or work-based problems essentially. And these problems are problems that we look at within the organization. And employees or staff normally grapple with these problems because of the fact that they are multitasking. They have lots of, responsibilities and roles to fulfill. Some of them are daily, some of them have to be done weekly, some of them have to be done quarterly, and obviously some annually, against which they are, there is a performance appraisal. And then I also email you, a handout on the variety of styles. Here, the objective is to primarily look at picking up 3 different forms of communication. 2 or 3 essentially, and the idea would be to try and incorporate in the assignment. When I talk about it, would be that you have an example of an email that you've written as a colleague or as an employee or as a staff member to your manager, or from a manager to your staff. It talks about a specific issue. We will have a reference or a template for a letter, and the third would be which is a discussion. And these 3 will then become a part of your assignment straight away. So these are kind of practical tasks wherein you have to pick up an example of an email that you've written, a letter that you've written, a formal letter, and lastly but not the least, maybe a minute of the meeting or some sort of an informal discussion to look at how you can communicate at various levels using different styles of communication or different forms of communication. So for example, i.e. if you're writing to your manager, you look at maybe writing through an email or a formal letter. If you're asking for, say, a reason to look at promotion, if you look at as a father or as a parent, if you're writing to the head teacher in the school, then the style of communication in that case would be a formal letter. So a template of that formal letter I will provide, and you'll have to kind of tailor it to meet the requirements for the assignment. Similarly, we are looking at email, and then we are looking at an informal email or maybe a discussion, minutes of the meeting or a discussion that you had with your colleague, and that is what is documented, and that will cover task 4.2. And the last one, which is time management, is going to be covered extensively in this presentation that we're going to discuss. And hopefully this will be meaty enough in terms of providing you the material to write the task in terms of the assignment. But here the idea would be to try and look at what are the effective time management strategies. So sometimes we look at the Johari matrix or the window, wherein it talks about urgent, important, not something urgent but important, urgent, and also important. So that Johari window is something which we will cover here, and obviously those are techniques that we use as managers to be able to manage tasks, manage employees, and make sure that at the end of the day the objectives are met and the tasks are done, or the work which is being given is delivered.
Okay.
So any questions on this so far? Let me start the presentation if that's okay, and then I think depending on how we are faring up in terms of time, what we will do is either I'll ask you to email your PDP and your SWOT to me, which I'll go through offline, and then maybe give you some comments or feedback on it over the weekend, longish weekend. If not, then obviously we'll discuss briefly in the next session.
Okay.
Right. Now, what do you understand by transferable first, just as a literal meaning of the word transferable?
You basically transferring skills elsewhere. So if you got like certain experience or skills in one role, you can transfer it to another role.
That is correct. So if I look at just the meaning of the word transfer, basically it means that there is something that you have within your possession, or something within something which is tangible or intangible, and that is something which you own. And when you're looking at transferring it, or when we say it is transferable, is the sense that you're able to use that skill, maybe that ability, maybe that advantage to better suit a situation in which you are put into. And obviously, as you rightly said, transferable skill would be, we look at things like any abilities and skills which help us do the same job, but in different sectors or different areas of life, or different situations in life. So an example of here, a very basic example of transferable skill that you could pull out or maybe mention would be, you have a skill wherein you are able to speak to or communicate at different levels, as we were just picking up on learning outcome 4. So how to communicate to your boss and your chief executive. You're able to communicate with your peers, and you're also able to communicate with your colleagues. And there's a certain differentiation in the tone of language, or maybe the style of language that you use. And because you understand that process fairly well, and you're able to do it quite efficiently, effectively, is where you can actually claim that you have transferable skills as far as communication is concerned.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Some of us, we also say that we've got, I'm kind of say an extrovert, or I can basically speak to public at large, or, make extempo speeches. But sometimes when it comes to, say, having telephone skills, or maybe picking up the phone and speaking to someone, or, something like that, in those circumstances, when you're not able to translate that effectiveness in terms of the ability to speak and communicate well in public, but not on the phone, wherein you are not adequately conveying that message on the phone, kind of says that you do not have maybe perfect communication skills which allow you to speak on each, or with the use of each and every medium. Some people are able to write well, some people are able to speak well, some people are able to write, speak, and also express themselves well in a public situation. Correct?
Yeah.
So if you look at all the three, and you are able to do it maybe in different situations, different facets of life, then you could definitely claim that you have these skills. But if either or is there, then at some stage you say, okay, I have intermediate or beginner skills in terms of open communication or open channels of communication and things like that. So transferable is a word that you get to hear quite a lot when you do HR interviews, when you do inductions, when you do training sessions. You will normally find the trainer asking you questions in order to get you started, or in order to get you going, so that they can pick up on some of these points that you have, which you treat as, your assets, or which you treat as your strength areas, and they then can be molded into areas, molded into advantages or abilities for you to be able to deal with a complex situation. And those are what I would classify as something called transferable skills. Now, these are used very frequently in job interviews, when you apply for a job, or when you're writing a CV. And people usually think of these skills as transferable skills because they are also looking at, in some cases, maybe a career change. So if you're from, say, IT and telecoms, and you want to go into something else as a field, you can always say, or sometimes you hear people saying that I've got transferable skills because I've worked as a product manager, or I've worked as a sales manager in this environment, and I can understand that when I'm moving to a different sector, these are equivalent to the products which I used to sell, and they are also effectively products, so I will be able to sell those quite well when I move into this role, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there are lots of examples that we can pick up, and these are examples that you can pick up from your daily life, from within your friends and family, and also when we look at various situations and take a third party or an outside perspective on that. Now, why do employers look for these skills is what we will look at. What is the transferable skill cycle? When do we say the skills become transferable? So there is a cycle that we will look at, and if you have gone through that particular stage, or like a process wherein you have acquired these skills, you have the ability to be able to deliver on these skills, and then at some stage you have presentation and professionalism, and these skills then end up matching maybe a profile or a job that you're applying for, then becomes something called the transferable skills. And that is with what we'll look at briefly through the skill cycle. And then what I'll try and do is highlight a few skills which are transferable, and also we'll look at the importance of why they are important, especially in certain situations. Now, as we said, so just going through what's mentioned and what we discussed. Now, these skills are skills that you acquire, and these skills you acquire predominantly through the fact that you have gone through the whole activity of experiencing something, wherein this then becomes permanent as far as a record or an impression is concerned in your memory, in most circumstances. So a transferable skill would be that if you're able to drive a bicycle when you were a young boy, you're able to drive a bicycle, which is a different kind of a bicycle, or maybe something when you grow up, and then you're able to also transfer the skill of balancing when you try and drive a motorbike, isn't it?
Yeah.
So skills that you acquire during an activity in your life, they can be applied at a later stage or in new situations, are basically called transferable skills. So I know how to drive a car. At some stage, if I want to drive a car with a camper van, or if I want to drive a camper van, then my same skills of driving can be considered transferable if I'm able to drive that camper van well, and similarly to maybe a truck or something like that. You can acquire these skills in all sorts of activities. It could be employment, projects, voluntary work, hobbies, and sports, things like that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, these are examples of transferable skills. So, for example, when people say I have an analytical ability, that means if you give them a problem and ask them to find a solution, they'll approach the problem through some sort of an analytical process. That means they'll break the problem down into a number of factors, and then look at it, and then basically try and arrive at a solution in terms of which factor basically either kind of helps accomplish that problem or solution, or kind of make the problem or solution not working. So then at a higher level, at a personal level, these are skills that we say these are transferable skills. So when you write on your CV, or when you are basically looking at skills that we talk about on a personal level, we are basically talking about these skills. But when we talk about skills, when we are looking at working within a team, or at a managerial level, or at a senior level, these are the skills that we basically say we are transferable. That means you have willingness to learn. So given a situation, put you into a role, you would be able to adapt to that role or that responsibility, which means you are a proactive learner, not a reactive learner, or you do not need, in some cases, you might not need training and development. Commitment. These are skills that we say when we are in managerial position or senior positions. Are you able to spot the difference? Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, when do we say employers look for them? Now, when we say employers are always looking for transferable skills, is because they see somebody who comes across with multifaceted skills or multifaceted, let's put it this way, abilities. Then in that case, they value or cherish the worker more. This is primarily because of a reason that sometimes sometimes organization actually recruit employees for one or two particular roles, keeping that in mind. But at some stage, as the business begins to grow or as the department begins to expand, what then tends to happen is that they try and look for an individual in which these skills can be developed, and that skill could be, say for example, in some cases it could be an enlargement or a scaling up of the skill, and in some cases these skills could be developed so that that person is able to take care of or step into that particular role. And once you acquire that skill, they know that you have the capability and the capacity to transfer into another side of the organization or other function of the organization, because you are able to kind of help it develop further, and that is nothing but which is called skill progression. Now, sometimes you also see that within your CVs and interviews, employees look for concrete evidence. What we use is something called, most employment agencies currently do, is something called do you know the word which they normally use? So they use, in most employment agencies, they use something called keywords when they scan your CV. Correct? As we use keywords for SEO, search engine optimization, because when you apply for a job, what tends to happen is a lot of agencies and companies now have some sort of a software. And what they do is, in order to skim through the CVs and the responses they've received, what they look at is, in order to create a skill match, that means the person having applied for that role has actually the skill which has been mentioned in the CV for which they are looking at from a point of view of job description. So what most companies, these recruitment companies, do is they run your CV through something called a keyword search. And these keyword search are essentially done on something called skills. So when you highlight things like, I have negotiation skills, I have team building skills, I have self-management skills, I have time management skills or problem solving skills, things like that. These are keyword searches which the agencies are able to do in your CV and pick it up and then go through in a bit more detail to see if it matches the requirement of what the company is recruiting this particular individual for. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, what do we call and how do we look at the skill acquisition cycle, or when we say these skills have become transferable, and we basically look at something called the transferable skill cycle. Now, the first process in looking at these skills becoming transferable is that what you look at is the acquisition of a particular ability. Now, in some cases, what tends to happen is when you look at when you are doing a task which is new to you, what tends to happen is that you hesitate maybe slightly, or you're not able to get it right the first time. There could be a number of reasons. When you are faced with a particular situation for the first time, you tend to react and you try and adjust and adapt to that situation. And that particular step is nothing but the acquisition of that skill. That means you're trying to familiarize yourself with the environment. And once you familiarize yourself with the environment and the situation that you're in, you're able to use your existing talent and abilities to be able to accomplish that particular task or that situation or go out of that situation that you're in. So skill acquisition primarily happens through the route of either through sports, employment, when you work in projects in large teams, when you do a bit of voluntary work, and also through hobbies. Once you've acquired the skill, what tends to happen is before even you look at the acquisition of the skill, what tends to happen is at some point in time, to give you an example here, would be that if I'm learning to, say, for example, play a guitar, or I'm learning to play a particular instrument, then what tends to happen is when you go to a particular organization or maybe say a company, for example, or a school which basically specializes in teaching learners that particular instrument, they tend to do something called an initial assessment test or some sort of a test to understand where you're coming from, to understand how and why is the reason that you're looking at learning this, and try and see on a certain type of scale where you are in terms of the acquisition of that particular skill. And that is nothing but what we call is something called the skill match. Now, once they see that you have the basic elements of being able to learn an instrument and you're able to cope with it, after the initial assessment they've done, what they do is they put you into some sort of lessons which will progressively allow you to gain that skill. That means allow you to play that instrument. So maybe they might take you to for a few weeks. They might take you to what you call attending a few classes, understanding the musical tones, or helping you pick up a particular instrument. And once that has happened, they then allow you to do a bit of practice on the instrument so that you start kind of imparting or practically working on the skills, theoretical skills that you've gained in order for you to progress in terms of learning that instrument. And that is something but something called skill progression. That means skills which have been developed, maybe in this case from a theoretical perspective, help you then get into a stage when you're ready in the sense to be able to do practical sessions as far as that is concerned. And then at some stage, when you have progressed steadily, stage after stage, to a particular level, wherein you are able to either teach this instrument to somebody else or you're able to play it extremely well, is what we will at some point in time then say is that yes, you have acquired the skill and you are now in a position to either teach this skill or help somebody learn this instrument, because you are in a situation wherein you know the ins and out of it, or you know a lot about it, to be in a position to step out of the learners category and to go into something called a trainer or a professional trainers category. So it starts with the cycle wherein there are 4 steps, and these 4 steps, when we look at in a logical fashion, basically consist of understanding where you are in terms of what you're trying to acquire. Once you understood that, there's a match which needs to be done to allow you to, on a stepwise fashion, progress into that area. Once you progress into that area sufficiently enough, then we say you've acquired the skill. And when you've acquired the skill, what we say is at some stage when you become an expert, you're at a position wherein you are able to then kind of work with that skill and work any particular instrument, because you understand the basic of how instruments or how music is created using instruments. A perfect example of that, which I normally give, is an example of something called the driving test. Now, in the driving test, what tends to happen is you first basically, get used to the fact that you're going to be looking at going to driving lessons. At some stage in those driving lessons, your trainer or your instructor is essentially asking, and on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, asking you to kind of step up on it and pick up new things, make you aware of certain rules and regulations, and you're progressing on that route to be able to become a learner driver. After a number of years or a number of years of driving on the roads, and obviously at that stage what you say is you're an experienced driver. But at some stage when it comes to obviously becoming an instructor and also helping maybe somebody in your family or your near dear ones or friends to help maybe give them a bit of practice, and you drive around with them as an experienced driver in the car, that is where you tend to say that, okay, my skills have become transferable, because I've started off from not knowing how to drive, learning how to drive, after a number of years of driving, becoming a progressive driver, and after becoming a progressive, have earned that kind of a progressive driver comfort, I'm able to now, in a position where I'm able to basically impart this off as, maybe give off some, tips and suggestions, or maybe, kind of become kind of an instructor, informal, whatever it is, to, your friends and colleagues. Now, this particular thing, is highlighted again with an example here, that what we look at is an example of, a sports, wherein there are certain things that only can be developed if you are put through that particular situation and you go through these particular stages. So we look at something called, a concrete stage or a good project stage, wherein you start alone first. But when you try and put together a football team as a manager, what you try and do is, you go through the whole process of working with the individual alone, understanding the abilities, the ins and outs, the strengths and weaknesses, then slowly and gradually try to put a team together of center forwards, people who will play, in different positions, And once you've done that, you try and work them together in a small group so that they are able to kind of, understand each other, work well. And, that practice makes it progressive in the sense that they then understand and the passes can happen accurately. And, the practice effect of it makes them work in a very coordinated team. And at some stage, what you get to see is when they play together as a team, they are able to be effective is because they go from, playing together to winning games. And that is what is the essence of, something called skills, which as a manager, as a football manager, or, somebody as a manager who manages the team is able to install within the team, which is a mentality of, winning games, or the spirit of, obviously how to play together, enjoy, and then also, win games. Is that clear enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there are reasons why you highlight your transferable skills in the CV. It's because you want your CV to stand out. You want, your skills to stand out so that you have a good chance of obviously netting or, getting the interview with the employer, or getting a shortlist, getting shortlisted for the interview with the employer. So these are things why, your transferable skills are important. Now, there is a clear importance of why these skills are required. And when we look at, why these skills are required, is if you look at your own, say, for example, your own learning history through the school, through the college, what we generally tend to see is that as we progress along from our childhood to teenager, from teenager to being an adult, what we've done is over the years, we have acquired a number of abilities or skills, as we call them. And these then have translated into our unique strengths and, in particular, our personality, which have shaped our personality as strengths. And what you then tend to do is basically try and build on these strengths so that you have advanced knowledge, or let's put it this way, you have these skills, some of these skills which can be perfected to become advanced, in the sense that at some stage what we say is the skills that I've acquired over the years can be put to practice in any situation. So some of these skills that we pick up, as a child, when you go through the schooling, the college and other things, would be things that are listed down here on the slide, which I'm referring to is things like the writing skills. Things that over the years, because as a student, I've done so much work, I have been able to, kind of perfect the skill of something called writing, in terms of, essays, dissertations, presentations, things like that. Because I've been a part of the school and the college and, various aspects of whatever I've gone through my schooling, what I've looked at is I've also to a certain extent developed team working skills. That means I'm able to work with my colleagues, my friends in the school, in the office or in the organization, things like that. And academically speaking, these are skills that we pick up, from an academic standpoint of view. Motivation. If I don't score well in my exams, then, my parents and obviously my friends, colleagues, my teachers motivate me to identify the areas where I've not performed well, and then I need to work on them. And that constant reworking helps me helps me motivate myself to be able to achieve better marks. And some of these skills then at some stage translate into higher order skills, which are skills like if you're working now within an organization and you have to finish a few reports, because you've developed the ability of writing reports, you are skillful enough to be able to meet a few deadlines. That means if you're sending out letters to say 3 employees or 4 employees, or emails reply to 3 or 4 employees, because you have the experience and the knowledge, you're able to turn those emails around with detailed responses to your colleagues. And this then, as a higher order skill in terms of writing, translates into the ability to be able to meet deadlines. So it kind of works hand in hand and allows you to kind of look at meeting, work deadlines. Similarly, team working skills allow you to learn a lot of things, and it builds the ability to be able to look at, willingness to learn. Research skills, at some stage, when we look at the, stage in terms of, when we were in school or in college, or, when you're in your entry-level first year of your job or things like that, when you start your first job, most of the skills that you look at from the perspective of, asking questions or looking at relevant facts and things is basically research that you want to do so that you're able to understand your job role well, or you know your environment well. But at some stage, when you understand the environment well, people well, what you try and do is you try and analyze these situations in different ways, which allow you to understand how to work with certain people, how to look at reacting to certain situations, and these skills on the research side then help you develop something called, you know, bit of analytical skills. So an example here would be, if you're working as a, you know, as a say administrative assistant, when you're given a job, what you try and then to do is just try and finish that job. Now, if your boss asks you to, you know, kind of collate all the invoices which have come in for the month, what you do is you basically get down to collating all the invoices, and you do a bit of research to try and see, okay, from the emails, you know, from the letters, collate all that together and put it in. Now, at a senior level, imagine if this is going across to a manager, what you try and do is then look at analyzing all the invoices and basically put some skills to it to see, okay, we had so many purchase invoices, we had so many sales invoices, we had so many credit notes, we had so many refunds, and you're able to kind of tabulate that information at a little senior level, because your initial research skills allow you to kind of group or analyze the situation, these invoices a bit analytically. And at a very senior level, what you are more interested in looking at is how many sales were the sales invoices more than the, you know, credit invoices or the purchase invoices. Helps you quickly analyze that, you know, whether the company has made profit, or, you know, have we made significant profit in that particular month, because you've just looked at the number and you know, because of experience background, that each invoice is average price of this much, and you know that is where it helps you kind of look at applying that analytical ability to be able to, you know, improve and also look at, you know, skills at different level. Is that something which you can relate to?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, going forward, you know, what we try and look at is sometimes when you look at, you know, kind of taking a new person on, or there's somebody who basically gets inducted into, say, a job role, and for him, what tends to happen is that you kind of look at some sort of an on-job training or work placement. Now here, the idea is you're trying to basically judge the individual in terms of whether the person, you know, a lot of companies, let's put it this way, a lot of companies today are looking at hiring apprentices and people can, you know, who will join them for work placements. The reason is that what they want to be able to do is kind of test the individual for a number of weeks or months, whatever it is, and then see, is the individual able to adapt and work within the environment. And when you look at that particular concept, what tends to happen is it is like a trial and hire kind of a method, or trial and fire kind of a method, wherein you're basically employing a few set of people to try and see if they have skills which can be used within your industry or within your job profile. And then what you're able to do is kind of pick up the individuals which have those skills or show those skills to be able to then bring them on as employees within that particular, role. So in some cases, what we tend to look at is a model called a STAR model, which stands for situation, task, action, and result. And what we do is, in those cases, what we try and do is we put those individuals through this particular process of giving them some work or a situation, and in these situation and tasks, the person is then given the relevant things to be able to create or basically work and then show results. And for those individuals which come out, kind of meeting the criteria in those kind of situations, then are basically inducted into a particular role or within the company. So this particular terminology, STAR, is commonly used by HR in particular when they look at hiring people for hiring freshers or fresh graduates from the campus into job roles. Is that something that you've come across?
When to look for experience rather than qualifications? Well,
in some cases, what tends to happen is they don't look for experience, because what they look at is, have you had the skills or have you had the experience of priorly, kind of working within that situation? And that is what they tend to look at. So when you look at companies now hiring people on apprenticeships or, work placements, what they're essentially looking at is people who are street smart, and they are testing their skills in a way using the STAR model to kind of finally shortlist a set of individuals which they can take on role at some stage. Because what is happening is that these people or freshers who are actually starting just after finishing their qualifications are people who are having no practical work experience. But what they tend to do is they put them to a situation called the STAR, wherein you are basically looking at giving them situations or tasks, and then they apply the existing skill set which they've learned through the academic or vocational route, coming fresh out of the university or college, whatever it is, and then apply that to that situation to be able to accomplish, work. And that accomplishment in terms of getting results is basically the STAR model, which everybody goes through when you join a new job or when you are in a new, given a new job responsibility. You go through that particular model, in terms of performance. Okay.
Yeah.
Now there are skills that we refer to as soft skills. Have you heard of the term called soft skills?
That's soft skills now.
Okay.
I've heard of interpersonal skills, key skills.
Absolutely. So when we say skills, we have lots of skills. There are skills which we are saying skills which are called soft skills, and these are called soft skills is because these skills are predominantly classified as interpersonal skills, social skills, skills which basically relate to a person's character or attitude or personality. And these skills, because they are classified on the basis of something, and they are quite particular for an individual, because they're related to the personality or that particular person, are classified as something called soft skills. Now, sometimes you will get to see that soft skills can also be developed within the employment route, or that means when you're working within an organization. And some of these skills, when we refer to as soft skills within the from an organizational perspective or employability perspective, is that you get to sometimes hear this as a remark, is that he's very soft spoken, that is why he's gone, he's bound to rise in the career. He's very he's all ears as far as suggestions are concerned, and that is why he's a very good manager. Now these soft skills work very, the requirement of these soft skills is something which a lot of organizations look at when they recruit people within managerial or supervisory capability or capacity. The reason is that here in this case, most of their work is essentially looking at working with resources, and the resource that they are going to be working together is going to be in most cases will be people. So when you look at soft skills, they are defined as skills, abilities, traits that pertain to personality, attitude, or behavior. Now, these skills, I cannot say that I have acquired because I've done a job, or I have acquired because, I have this experience. These skills are because this shapes up your personality or your character. And that is why they are called, soft skills. Now, soft skills basically fall into two domains. One is interpersonal, which are interactive, and the other is intrapersonal, which are motivational. So, have you heard this term called overt and covert behaviors?
No, I have heard of interpersonal skills though, and that's basically like assertiveness.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is
assertiveness.
Correct.
Where else passive, aggressive, that is part of interpersonal skills.
That is absolutely correct. Yes. So you're spot on that. So the other, thing which normally we look at when we match these two skills is what we look at is overt and covert behaviors. Now, overt behaviors basically can be defined as, observable behavior. That means in sometimes, when you react or when you are in a situation where, you give a response, your response can be depicted in the form of actions. That is something called the overt behavior. That means if you are, say, in a public situation, you're in a public gathering, and what tends to happen is somebody comes in and talks to you, and you get offended by that, and you show a particular reaction. That is nothing but something which is becoming observable by people around you. I don't know whether you've looked at, but there's a video which is making waves now on WhatsApp nowadays. Is during Donald Trump's visit. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but during Donald Trump's visit, what has happened is it's been shown that the president is trying to hold the hand of the Pope. Have you seen that video?
No, I haven't seen the video, but I've heard of him like pushing past the other presidents.
Yeah, so what tends to happen is, in that case, he might have some sort of an objective of why he was doing that, but because the other person has reacted in a way wherein it's been caught on the news, is something which is an observable behavior, and that happens because that is something which basically classifies him, that there was a reason why he was doing that, but because it was not spoken and only observed, which people were able to observe, is kind of classified as something called overt behavior. And similarly, when you look at the opposite of it, which is something called overt, is nothing but blatant. So it could be that overt is something which is out in the open. It's like a fact which is out in the open. You don't want these things to be shared, but at some point in time they go out in the open, and that is what becomes the blatant truth. So that is why it is called overt. And when you look at covert, covert is nothing but hidden. There might be certain things or practices which the organizations do, or individuals do, which are hidden behind the curtain. And when they are hidden behind the curtain, which are not known to the open public, are something called covert behavior, or something which means covert. That means it's hidden. So in between the soft, basically the idea here is that when we look at soft skills, they fall into two domains. There is something intrapersonal, then there is something interpersonal. And in between the two, wherein there is an overlap, you normally get to see behaviors from individuals which either lead to success or failures, and because of which they kind of either become show this openly, or talk about it blatantly, or in this case, in some cases you try and hide it because it tends to be a weakness, or an area of kind of a threat, which normally individuals try and kind of shy away from showing it openly. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is something that we look at, from a point of view of understanding, why is that we need to understand this in the aspect is to do with the field of psychology. Because when you try and understand colleagues working within the HR department, they're good, in a way, in the field of psychology. Some of them have degrees, or have their prior qualification in psychology, because it is the art of understanding people, and then appropriately reacting in a way wherein it is supposed to bring out something which is a win-win, or a pleasing attitude in terms of the whole situation. So sometimes when you see some psychologists or people who have studied psychology will exhibit overt and covert behaviors. And a pertinent example in this case would be when you go across to a psychologist to see him for a particular issue, problem, discussion, whatever it is. You will see that they have to behave in a way wherein some of the reactions or some of the things that you're telling them they need to show something called an overt behavior. That means there is no reaction at all. And in some cases they show a covert behavior, which is to do with the fact that they try and offer you advice because you're seeing them as a psychologist. And that is something which is then out in the open. They discuss with you openly. They discuss with you, in quite detail and at length, so that is something which is an issue which can be resolved. So it is considered, the domain of soft skill. And when we look at dwelling it into a bit more, we look at doing this kind of a an overlapping when you look at the two types of skill, you look at a subset, and you look at a subset within that. There's an area in which some of these things tend to be hidden, or some of these things tend to be quite blatantly or openly available. Now, there are some examples of interpersonal skills which fall into interactive soft skills as per that particular diagram. We look at teamwork, relationship building, adaptability as being interactive soft skills, and then we look at intrapersonal motivational soft skills, which are planning, taking initiative, problem solving. These fall into intrapersonal because they are more related to you, rather than interpersonal, which is more related when you are put in a situation, or you're put in a team, or you're put in a group, as you can see. Is that okay? You're able to develop a relationship if you are put together into a situation wherein there's an opportunity to develop a relationship. You are able to work in a team if you are working within a team. If you're working alone, then you're working alone. You can't work and develop these interpersonal skills. But when you're working alone, you're able to plan, prioritize. Sometimes you're able to show initiative because when there's an individual meeting happening with the manager, he is open to our taking suggestions. Then you individually propose something which is like taking initiative. So these are intrapersonal, means these are skills which are within your control, or these are skills which are specifically related to you. And when you are put into a team situation or a group situation, then they become something called interpersonal, wherein you have the ability to be able to develop and show those soft skills. I probably would kind of stop here if that's okay. This bit in terms of understanding a bit more on the skills, I'm going to try and send this presentation to you for you to be able to read, and then maybe we'll discuss these with the help of examples. I'm going to send you handouts which have some examples in it. So read them, and if you're able to not understand, if you need any more explanation, what I'm going to do is then we'll discuss this in this session before we start.
Okay.
Okay. Now, very briefly, what I want to be able to do is that these slides I'm skipping is because, some of these slides I want to go through with you when we have the PDP and the SWOT analysis in front of us.
Yeah.
Because there are these things you will pick out in opportunities and threats, could be areas which actually will be identified as skills that you want to develop. And I will classify them as skills which are interpersonal, some are intrapersonal. And then what we will look at is we'll go through the cycle of how do we develop these skills and evaluate these skills to see what contributes to these skills being your strength, which of these skills need to be developed further so that they become opportunities for you, and going further, that is what we will put in something called the personal development plan. Okay?
Okay.
Now, last bit that I'm going to just quickly go through, these were some pictures basically showing those things of how you develop these skills and, things like that, some pictures which I've collected. But going to time management, this is a very mundane topic, but I think our understanding in terms of what we want to understand is when we look at working within teams, working within an organization, we should be able to look at something called, we should be able to develop an ability which is something called to do with how do we prioritize. Okay?
Yeah.
And here, the idea of understanding time management is from that particular, aspect of understanding what is a Johari window and how does time management skill help us in, planning, effectively prioritizing things which are related to work. Now, there is something called a Johari window, which I'm just going to quickly look through if I've included this in the presentation. No, I don't think I have. Okay, so I'm going to send you a quick, handout on this along with the presentation. Now, there was, this particular person, Johari, basically, that is why it's called the Johari window. He was, he's the one who's credited with coming out with this particular concept wherein, it's a psychology tool, which basically, helps you prioritize things, when you're given jobs or, activities to do. Now, Johari window basically consists of 4 quadrants, right? Okay, and these 4 quadrants basically talk about, things which are known to you, things which are not known to you, and things which are known to others, and things which are not known to others. And in these 4 areas, he came up with a concept wherein he talked about something called, arena and blind spot, facade, and unknown. So these 4 quadrants were actually named, these 4 terms were given that if you have something which is not known to you and not known to others, then it's a blind spot or it is unknown, depending on where they are plotted on the axis. So if I have to very briefly try and see if I can draw this. So basically, if I look at drawing, this particular window, what tended to happen is these were the 4 areas that he looked at. And in these 4 areas, what he talked about here was there are certain things which are known to others. Okay, so known to others. And in this area, there were things which are not known to others. Not known. On my handwriting. And then in some areas, so with these are others. And here on this axis, what he said was there are things that are known to self. That means you are aware of these things. So here, basically, you are not aware in terms of that particular thing. And here, you are also, so basically not known to you and not known to yourself. And on this side, it is known to others and known to yourself as well. And this particular quadrant basically then was classified into 4 areas, which is called unknown, and here it was basically something which is called blind spot, and here is what we call the facade. That means it is something which is visible to everyone. It is the front face, so it's FACADE. And here is what we call the arena. That means it is out in the open. It is known to you, it is known to others. Here it is only known to others, but it is not known to you. Here it is known to others and also known to you. Here it is not known to you and not known to others. So basically he classified that at some stage what tends to happen is that when you look at, he did an exercise, and obviously what he did was he put some of the people through this particular matrix, and then rather than matrix, put these people into rooms, room 1 and room 2, and then basically slowly and gradually expanded to room 4. So what he did was in room 1, he put things which were known to ourselves and that you can see. And in room 2, he talked about things which are known to others, but you are not aware of. And in room 3, he spoke about things which were private and which were supposed to be hidden from others. And in room 4, he talked about things which were mysterious, or maybe things that you were unconsciously known about, unconsciously or subconsciously knew about, but you weren't very sure about knowing these things. Now, a best example to basically explain this would be, again, sticking to the driving example. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Right. Now, at some stage, when you become a driver or when you're learning to drive, how closely and how tightly you clutch the wheel with your hands. Correct? When you're learning, so when you're first time getting onto the vehicle to drive and you're trying to learn, your instructor always tells you, could you loosen your grip slightly on the steering wheel? But you're clutching it as hard as possible because it's new to you. Correct?
Yeah.
At some stage, when you have had a few lessons, what tends to happen is you become a bit comfortable. And because you've become a bit comfortable, you're unconsciously aware that I do not need to grip this too hard, because when I try to move it, I need to show a lot of movement or move my hands quite heavily to be able to move the steering wheel. Now, when you have driven for a number of years, at some stage, and you've obviously gained your driver's license, at some stage what tends to happen is when you're driving, you're also able to do other activities while you're driving, right?
Yeah.
An example of that would be that in the initial bit, when you are beginning to kind of drive, what tends to happen is that you are very conscious, you're very alert. And because you're very conscious and very alert, what tends to happen is that you keep track of every red light, every person crossing the road and things like that. But at some stage, when you become an experienced driver, what tends to happen is that sometimes you have the other hand on your gear and you clearly know which gear to put in, and you're driving and you're also doing other activities. Correct?
Yeah.
And then last is one stage when it comes that sometimes what tends to happen is when you become such an experienced driver and you've gone through that particular road or that street time and again for a number of years, you exactly know where the traffic light is, you exactly know where the speed camera is, you exactly know where to slow down and when to speed up, because you know it at the back of your head. So that is when you are unconsciously aware and consciously and unconsciously aware of the route on which you are driving. So even if you have a slight bit of distraction, like a phone ringing, or if your kid or somebody in the back of your car asking you a question, you're able to continue conversation with them and also keep continually driving and also observing all the traffic rules while you're doing that. Correct?
Yeah.
Now, this is the concept of what is the Johari window, is wherein he then spoke about, developed this particular framework, wherein he then had this particular terminology, wherein at some stage, when you do these things and these skills become transferable, you try and your mind and your brain tries and adapts to a technique which is basically nothing called but the Johari window. That means there are areas in your in your skills that you're aware of and the others are aware of, and that is why they tend to be out in the open, and obviously they become your strength. There are areas and skills that you have which you are aware of, but the others are not, and that is where others see you as a threat, or they see you as competition. Now there are areas in which you do not know you have that skill, but only your manager knows that you have that skill, and he puts you into that situation because out of the others, he has observed you and has seen you that you are the only one which has that capability to be able to adapt and do that, or maybe get that job done. And that is an area wherein the skill is not known to you but known to your manager, and that area is nothing but a blind spot. And there are some areas in which what tends to happen is you don't know what you're capable of, and also the department or the work person who's working with you in terms of your manager does not know that if it's a talent or if it's an ability or a skill which you possess, but only happens, and he or she only gets to know about it from the aspect of serendipity. That means if a situation arrives and you react on that situation, or you do handle that situation quite well, because of that situation which has arrived or happened, they get to know of that particular skill, and that skill is classified as something called unknown. So this particular framework, Johari framework, can be put into different situations to analyze your skills, because it's a part of something which is called a psychology tool to, or look at when people look at putting people through psychometric tests. So it is used as a framework to design certain of these tests, and also at some point in time it is used within the organization to look at prioritizing work. So this is wherein you can classify it in as urgent and important, something which is not urgent but important, something which is important but not urgent. You heard of that?
Yeah, there's like you can do like a table that you got important, not important, urgent and not urgent. So we can use that table to put whatever task you got on, put it in there, then we can determine which is urgent, which is not urgent, what's important, what's not important.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. So that's the one that I'm referring to. So time management basically will involve, in terms of looking at setting objectives, setting those objectives as per that classification criteria of important, not important, important but urgent, important and urgent. And then that helps you in prioritizing work, making, or probably not making, doing jobs more effectively. And in some cases, managers use this as a technique to be able to delegate effectively, so that they are able to share their workload and ensure that they as a team are still able to manage and deliver the work which is required of them on time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here. Reason being, it's become a long session, but at the same point in time, there's not much to take in. And what I'm going to try and do is when I leave office, maybe either later today or tomorrow morning, we'll send you these two presentations, which are time management and transferable skills. I'm going to try and delete some of the slides so that they are more concise to what we are looking at going through in this unit. And the other bit is I'm going to send you two handouts which will look at work-based problems and issues and how it is solved. And the other bit would be to look at basically understanding, these templates to look at effective communication styles.
Okay.
Good stuff. So I am going to stop here if that's okay. And then what we will do is we will catch